In the early hours of a November morning in 1877, a midwife named Prudence Calloway walked out of a farmhouse in Roane County, West Virginia, into a field that had been freshly turned for winter, carrying a canvas satchel she had brought in full and was leaving empty. She had been inside that farmhouse for 11 hours. She had delivered 214 children in her 31 years of practice across 4 counties. She had sat with mothers through fevers, through hemorrhage, through the particular silence of a birth that does not go the way anyone in the room has prayed for. She was not a woman who startled easily. She was not a woman who frightened at all, by any account left by anyone who had known her. She walked to the far edge of the field, to the place where the soil had been broken deepest, and she buried something. She packed the earth back carefully. She smoothed it with the flat of her boot. And then she walked back to the farmhouse, collected her kit, declined the payment she was owed, and rode home in the dark without speaking to anyone she passed on the road. She did not speak about that night for 6 years. When she finally did, the first thing she said was that the infant had been alive. The second thing she said was that she had not buried the infant. The official record of Roane County, West Virginia, for the year 1877 contains no birth registration corresponding to the farmhouse on the Lewiston Road where Prudence Calloway attended that delivery. There is no record of the mother. There is no record of the father. There is no record of the property changing hands, being sold, being abandoned, or being demolished. The farmhouse simply ceases to appear in any county document after the spring of 1878. The land it stood on is listed in the 1880 county survey as vacant and unimproved, as though nothing had ever been built there. Prudence Calloway was not a woman whose word required defending. She had held a county midwifery license since 1846. She had been called to testify in 2 separate inheritance disputes in Roane County Circuit Court, on both occasions to confirm the circumstances of a birth she had attended, and on both occasions her testimony had been accepted without challenge by the presiding judge. She was, by the written assessment of a county health officer in 1869, the most reliable birth recorder in the Western District. In 1883, she gave a full account of the November 1877 delivery to a Methodist minister named Aldous Fenn, who was collecting what he described as testimonies of unusual providence from residents of the region. Fenn recorded her account in a journal he kept for this purpose, a journal that his daughter donated to the Roane County Historical Society in 1931. The journal is listed in the Society's donation ledger. The pages covering Prudence Calloway's account, Fenn had noted the page numbers on his own index card at the front of the journal, have been removed. The cuts are clean. The remaining pages show no damage. Within 3 months of giving that account to Fenn, Prudence Calloway's county midwifery license was reviewed and suspended on the grounds that her registration had lapsed. She had held it continuously for 37 years. The lapse, according to the county clerk's notation, had occurred in 1871, 12 years earlier, and had somehow gone unaddressed until the spring of 1883. She died in 1886. She was 67 years old. The cause listed in the county death register was cardiac failure. Her neighbor, a farmer named Silas Greer, told his son many years later that Prudence Calloway had walked 3 miles to his fence line the week before she died to return a borrowed tool, and that she had seemed to him entirely well. She had said one thing to him that he remembered. She had said that she wished she had drawn what she saw, because words, in the end, were not equal to it. Before we go further, if you find these buried accounts as compelling as I do, hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. Now, back to Prudence Calloway and what she found waiting for her inside that farmhouse on the Lewiston Road. To understand what happened in Roane County in November of 1877, we have to go back, not just a few years, and not just to the local history of one county in West Virginia. We have to go back to a period that the textbooks cover in a single paragraph and then leave entirely alone. The decades immediately following the Civil War, when the eastern half of the United States was being surveyed, mapped, cataloged, and documented with a thoroughness that had never been attempted before. And when that documentation kept turning up the same problem. The problem was bones. From the 1840s onward, as construction crews, railway gangs, and agricultural laborers broke ground across Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, they kept encountering skeletal remains in and around the ancient mounds that dotted the landscape. Remains that the attending physicians, the county surveyors, and the amateur naturalists who examined them kept describing in the same terms. Unusual stature, unusual bone density, cranial dimensions outside any range the examiners had encountered in their professional experience. Not one or two such finds, dozens, across multiple states, across multiple decades. The Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology, established formally in 1879, was in part a direct institutional response to this accumulation of inconvenient material. Its mandate, as stated publicly, was the scientific study of Native American peoples and their history. Its actual operational priority, as the pattern of its early field work suggests, was the collection, centralization, and controlled interpretation of everything being pulled out of the ground before independent researchers could establish a competing narrative. Prudence Calloway had lived her entire life in the middle of this territory. Roane County sits in the heart of the Kanawha Valley, a region dense with earthworks, mound complexes, and the kind of deep forest land where things could persist undisturbed for a very long time. She had attended births in farmhouses and cabins spread across a 40-mile radius. She had seen things that did not make it into her official registration records, because her official registration records only required her to document the living. What brought her to the Lewiston Road farmhouse that November was a message delivered by a man she did not know. A rider who came to her door at midday handed her a folded note with an address and a sum of money, and told her she was expected before nightfall. The sum was 4 times her standard fee. She had asked the rider who the family was. He had told her she would understand when she arrived. She had understood before she reached the door. There is a growing body of documented evidence suggesting that the official history of the Ohio and Kanawha River valleys in the period between 1840 and 1890 contains deliberate omissions that go beyond the ordinary gaps of incomplete record-keeping. Newspaper accounts of unusual skeletal finds that were covered in local papers and then never followed up. Field notes by Bureau of Ethnology agents that describe subjects and locations not referenced in any published report. Land transactions executed at prices that make no economic sense unless the buyer had a specific and urgent reason to control what was beneath the soil. This is the world Prudence Calloway worked in, and this is where her account of that November night connects to a pattern far larger than one farmhouse in one county. Calloway's account, as reconstructed from the partial record, a summary written by Minister Fenn in a letter to a colleague that survived because it was sent rather than retained, discovered in a private collection in 1998. Described arriving at the Lewiston Road farmhouse to find it occupied by a woman she had never seen, a man who did not give his name, and a second man stationed outside the door who she described as not a farmhand. The mother was in labor. That much was ordinary. What was not ordinary was that Calloway understood within her first minutes of examination that the proportions she was working with were not the proportions of any delivery she had attended before. She did not use the word giant in the letter summary. She used the phrase, "a child of the kind the old people in this county have always said were here before us." The delivery took 11 hours. The infant was born alive. Calloway recorded its length because she recorded the length of every infant she delivered. It was her professional habit. At 29 inches, a large but not impossible length for a human newborn at the extreme end of normal range. What she also recorded, in the same habitual notation, was the birth weight. She had brought a scale, as she always did. The weight she recorded was 47 pounds. A standard large human newborn weighs between 8 and 11 pounds. The largest reliably documented human birth weight in the 19th century medical literature was 23 pounds, a case reported in a German medical journal in 1871 and considered extraordinary enough to warrant publication. Prudence Calloway, in a farmhouse on a dirt road in Roane County, West Virginia, recorded a birth weight of 47 pounds. And she was a woman who, by the testimony of every county official who had ever worked with her records, did not make errors in her notations. The infant was alive and, by her account, vigorous. The mother survived the delivery. Calloway cleaned and swaddled the infant in the cloth she had brought. She noted in the letter that the standard swaddling cloth she carried was insufficient, and that she had used a full bedsheet from the farmhouse, and placed it in the mother's arms. Then the man who had not given his name told her what she would be doing before she left. He told her that there were materials from the delivery that needed to be disposed of away from the house, away from the road, and away from any place that could later be identified. He gave her the canvas satchel. He told her the field to the north had been prepared. He told her that this was part of the commission she had been paid for, and that the additional sum she would find in the satchel when she opened it at home was contingent on her completing it without discussion. She took the satchel. She went to the field. She buried what was inside it. She never opened it in the light, she said, and she was glad she had not. What she did say, in the letter Fenn forwarded to his colleague, was that the satchel had been heavy. Not heavy in the way of fluid or cloth or ordinary biological material from a delivery. Heavy in a different way. Heavy, she said, as though it contained something that had been grown around something else, something that was not flesh, and was not bone, and was not anything I have a word for. She said she had felt it through the canvas with her hands as she dug, and that the feeling had stayed with her for years, that she sometimes woke in the night still feeling it, that she had prayed about it more than she had prayed about anything else in her life, including the deaths she had witnessed, and that prayer had not resolved it. Now consider the documentary thread that runs alongside Calloway's account, because she was not the only person in Roane County paying attention that November. A justice of the peace named Harmon Wicks kept a private diary from 1869 to 1891, a document that passed through his family and was eventually deposited with the West Virginia and Regional History Center at West Virginia University. where it remains today in their manuscript collection. Wicks was a meticulous daily writer. He recorded weather, local transactions, personal observations, and the movements of notable strangers through the county. His entry for November 14, 1877, 11 days after the date Callaway later identified as the night of the delivery, notes the presence of 3 men of a federal appearance, not Army, carrying document cases, who had passed through the county seat, asked directions to the Lewiston Road, and returned through town the following morning, with a wagon covered in canvas and riding faster than they had come. His entry for November 15th notes that the wagon had been accompanied on its return by a 4th rider who had joined it at the edge of town and did not stop. His entry for November 17th notes that a farmer named Aldous Crane, whose land bordered the Lewiston Road property, had come to Wicks to ask whether any transaction had been filed on the adjacent farm, as the farmhouse appeared to be empty and the family he had seen there the previous week was gone. No transaction had been filed. Wicks checked. No transaction was ever filed. The family on the Lewiston Road, a family present and visible enough for a neighboring farmer to have noticed them, simply left no legal trace of ever having been there at all. Now consider the pattern. Boone County, West Virginia, 1869. A doctor named Fletcher Crane reported in a letter to a colleague at the Medical College of Virginia that he had been called to attend a birth in a remote property east of the Coal River. He described the infant as of a proportion inconsistent with my experience. His letter survives in a private archive. His medical registration was reviewed and temporarily suspended the following year for reasons the county board did not specify in writing. Lincoln County, West Virginia, 1873. A circuit-riding preacher named Elijah Sowers recorded in his travel journal, held today at a Baptist historical archive in Charleston, that a family along his route had shown him an infant he could not account for. He wrote that he had prayed over it and that it had watched him with an attention no infant of ordinary days should possess. He visited the family again 6 months later. The property was empty. The neighbors told him the family had moved on. Putnam County, West Virginia, 1875. A county surveyor named James Poole filed a report with the State Geological Survey noting an occupied structure on a remote parcel near the Taze Valley that did not appear in any land registry. He was instructed by a letter from the state capital to remove the notation from his survey. The letter is in the state archives. The instruction was followed. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern, and the institutional response to that pattern was not slow. The Bureau of Ethnology's operational expansion into West Virginia in 1880 and 1881, 1 year after its formal establishment, was led by a field supervisor named Garrett Poole, no apparent relation to the surveyor, who filed 34 separate county-level reports in 18 months. 31 of those reports are in the National Anthropological Archives. 3 are listed in the index and physically absent from the collection. 2 of the 3 missing reports cover Roane County. The third covers Lincoln County. The years they describe are 1877 and 1878. But here is what makes Prudence Callaway's account different from every other suppressed birth record in this region. In 1921, a retired nurse named Cora Bledsoe gave a lengthy interview to a journalist from the Charleston Gazette who was writing a feature on the history of midwifery in West Virginia. The feature was published. The interview, in its full form, was not. The journalist, a man named Paul Eckert, kept his interview notebooks, and those notebooks were donated to the West Virginia and Regional History Center by his granddaughter in 2004. In the unpublished portion of that interview, Cora Bledsoe, who had trained under Prudence Calloway from 1874 to 1879, described being present in Calloway's home one evening in 1882 when a man arrived unannounced, spoke to Calloway privately for approximately 20 minutes, and left without being introduced. After he had gone, Calloway had sat down at her kitchen table and said nothing for a long time. Then she had said to Bledsoe, "There are more of them, in this county, and they know who I am." Bledsoe said she had not understood what Calloway meant. She said she had not asked. She said she had always wished she had. If Calloway was telling the truth about what she had delivered and what she had buried, then Bledsoe's account does not merely add texture to the story. It suggests that Calloway's silence in the years following that November night was not the silence of a woman who had decided to forget. It was the silence of a woman who had been told, clearly and in person, that forgetting was the safer choice. The Bureau of American Ethnology has never adequately addressed the operational gap in its Roane County fieldwork records for 1877 and 1878. It has never explained why 2 of its 3 missing West Virginia county reports cover precisely the counties and years described in Calloway's account and in Justice of the Peace Wicks's diary. It has never explained why a woman with a 37-year unblemished professional record had her license reviewed and suspended within 3 months of giving a private account to a minister. An account that was never published, never broadly circulated, and by all appearances never intended to leave that minister's private journal. It has never explained what the 3 men of federal appearance were transporting on a canvas-covered wagon out of Roane County on the morning of November 15, 1877, or why they were riding faster going out than they had been coming in. Why would a man unknown to Calloway pay 4 times her standard fee for a delivery in a farmhouse with no registered occupants? Why would the Bureau of Ethnology's own index acknowledge reports that its physical archive cannot produce? Why would a woman who had testified without incident in county court on 2 occasions, whose professional credibility was unquestioned for nearly 4 decades, have her registration suddenly reviewed the same season she spoke privately to a minister about a single night from 6 years earlier? These questions don't go away because institutions refuse to answer them. Prudence Calloway is buried in a small Methodist cemetery outside Walton, West Virginia. Her headstone gives her name, her birth year of 1819, and her death year of 1886. Below her name, in lettering that a cemetery researcher noted in 1988, appears to have been added after the original stone was cut. Slightly different in depth and spacing are 3 words. She knew more. No one in the Calloway family has ever explained who added those words or when. The oldest living member of the family, reached by a researcher in 2003, said only that the addition had been there as long as anyone could remember, and that the family had always assumed Prudence herself had arranged for it. That it was, in the words of this family member, her way of leaving a door open. The field on the Lewiston Road where she buried the contents of that canvas satchel on a November night in 1877 is today part of a larger agricultural parcel. It has been plowed and planted and turned over more than 100 times in the century and a half since she smoothed the earth flat with the sole of her boot. Whatever she placed in that ground has long since been worked into the soil by seasons and machinery and time. Except that it hasn't. Not entirely. Because in 2011, a hobbyist using a metal detector on that property with the owner's permission recorded 3 anomalous readings at depths between 14 and 22 inches in the area corresponding to the far northern edge of the original Lewiston Road parcel. He described the readings in an online forum post as consistent with a dense, non-ferrous object, possibly multiple objects, possibly encased. He said he had flagged the coordinates and intended to return with a ground-penetrating radar unit. He posted that in March of 2011. He never posted again. The coordinates he listed are still in the forum archive. The field is still there. And somewhere beneath the turned and planted and ordinary-looking soil of Roane County, West Virginia, in a place a woman walked to alone in the dark 147 years ago, something is still reading as dense and non-ferrous and possibly encased, exactly where Prudence Calloway left it. The official record tells us that accounts of unusual births, extraordinary infants, and giant remains in the Ohio Valley are the folklore of an unscientific era. Stories told by people who lacked the tools to understand what they were seeing. What the commission ledgers, the missing reports, the cut journal pages, the federal wagons moving fast in the early morning, and the 3 words on a headstone in Walton, West Virginia tell us is that someone with very good tools understood exactly what was being seen and went to considerable lengths to make sure no one else would. These stories survive because women like Prudence Calloway said enough, even when they could not say everything. And because people like you refuse to accept that the silence around a story is not the same as the story being untrue. History doesn't disappear when it's buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Next week, I'm pulling the thread that connects the federal wagon out of Roane County directly to a receiving facility in Washington that processed what the Bureau's internal correspondence, in a document that should not have survived and nearly did not, called Living and Non-Living Acquisitions of the Western Survey. 1 ledger, 1 building, 1 column that lists things no government catalog has any business listing. You won't want to miss it.